Welcome to Sino-Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer. Today, in an unusually long episode, we have the pleasure of studying the successive battles of Guiling and Maling, both of which resulted in dramatic victories for the state of Qi, thanks to Sun Bi's strategic conceptions and his operational tactics. The extended clashes unfolded around the middle of the 4th century BC, in the era aptly known as the Warring States period, because the original 12 states battled each other into non-existence, allowing aggressive Qin in the southwest to conquer the realm and establish the first of China's 25 imperial dynasties in 221 BC. The ever-evolving political situation played a major role in prompting Wei's ill-fated campaigns of aggression. Unfortunately, it's too complex to pursue in detail here, but an extensive analysis can be found in the historical introduction to my translation of Sun Bi's military methods. 4 of the era's so-called 7 powerful states were involved: Han, Wei, Zhao, and Qi. However, not Qi, whose looming presence in the southwest was never far from anyone's mind. At its formal inception in 403 BC, the state of Wei was the most powerful of the 3 entities that emerged when the major clans fractured the formerly mighty state of Jin, because it retained control over a significant portion of the Central Plains area. However, it consisted of 2 discrete areas connected by a highly vulnerable corridor, as shown here. Furthermore, its 2 major cities, Anyi in the west and Daliang in the east, were highly susceptible to attack despite formidable defensive works, because they generally lacked natural obstacles that could impede invaders. On the other hand, Wei had a strong military heritage. Earlier, the famous general, strategist, and military minister Wu Qi, reputed author of the Wuzi, not only defeated Qin numerous times and extended Wei's territory to the west by several hundred li, but he had also been an able military administrator. Unfortunately for highly prosperous Wei, extensive campaigns and political infighting with just about every state weakened their own forces and antagonized potential allies in the decades before Guiling unfolded. Nevertheless, its military strength was estimated to be about 360,000 elite soldiers, with perhaps another 100,000 tangled in border defense, and 1,000 chariots, though that might be a serious underestimate. Geographically, Han and Zhao occupied former Jin's southern and northern portions. Although severed by Wei's corridor, Han's territory extended upward into Zhao in a mushroom-like incursion, destabilizing Zhao's otherwise solid hold over the northern area. Unfortunately for Han, it was confronted by potential enemies on all 4 sides, whereas Zhao benefited from mountainous terrain, constricted roads, despite its exposure to more northern barbarians. Somehow, Han and Zhao failed to implement the sort of reforms that began to empower the other states early in the Warring States period. Although Zhao clashed with several of them after its inception, its chief success lay in defeating the minor state of Wei and annexing a significant portion of its territory, including the city of Handan, which they then made their capital. For its part, Han exterminated the formerly important state of Zheng and moved its own capital to the major city of Zheng. Each of these capitals, Wei's ill-chosen campaign targets, were well fortified by astonishingly thick and high walls and had perimeters of 10 to 15,000 feet per side. Zhao reportedly had 100,000 trained troops and maybe 1,000 chariots. Han's forces were more than double, with a core of maybe 200,000 trained soldiers and another 100,000 on border duty. It might be noted that once Qin had been dismembered, Han, Wei, and Zhao continued to be entangled in temporary alliances with each other, even as they fell victim to old factional enmities and actually fought each other. Physically situated in the east, Qi's territory extended from the plains to the Yellow and Bow Seas. And they thus shared inland borders with all the important states other than Qin. Rich in natural resources, Qi had benefited for centuries from enlightened policies and economic development, and it also enjoyed a long heritage of military expertise initiated by its founder, the famous Zhou dynasty strategist known as the Taikung, who is the reputed, but of course not the actual author, of the expansive Six Secret Teachings. Although the state of Qi had deteriorated somewhat due to its misgovernment, it was believed capable of fielding several 100,000 troops. In attempting to understand battlefield developments in the Warring States period, we should keep in mind that as the cavalry had not yet appeared, chariots, which could number in the thousands, still played the crucial role as the arm of mobility, as well as command and archery platforms. However, due to the vast increases in infantry, field forces had multiplied since the spring and autumn period, 100,000 men often being mobilized for a campaign. The infantry normally functioned in coordination with chariot groups, but could also operate alone. Naturally, the science of command and control, the tactics, and the professionalism found at every level had all evolved. Weapons remained the bronze sword, which was finally lengthening due to metallurgical advances to be more of a sword than a dagger. Iron versions, still brittle, had also appeared. However, spears and long-shafted dagger axes were the chief weapons employed in combat. Bows and arrows, of course, retained their importance for action at a distance. Particularly noteworthy was the development and perfection of the crossbow, whose first recorded use is at the Battle of Ma-ling. Not only did it surpass China's famous compound bows in range and power, it required far less training to master. Now, as Sun Bi's life and achievements are extensively discussed in our earlier YouTube videos, we just need to note that the ill-fated strategist was probably one of Sunzi's lineal descendants, as well as the inheritor of his writings and his school of thought. Around the middle of the 4th century BC, he came to serve as an advisor in the state of Qi after having fallen victim to Peng Zhuan's machinations, the man who now acted as Wei's commander-in-chief in the two clashes at Guiling and Maling, as the king of Wei foolishly embarked on a martial quest for power and glory. And when it comes to the campaigns themselves, discrepancies remain, even though the basic facts are well established. The interpretation to follow, therefore, represents what I believe to be the best possible reconstruction, based on early historical writings, chapters in Sun Bi's military methods, the capabilities of ancient armies, the political situation, dominant personalities, and the generally practiced tactics. To facilitate the presentation, we'll take advantage of the phase diagrams prepared for my Sun Bi volume, even though the names employ Wei Jia's romanization. Now, in both cases, Wei precipitously undertook campaigns of conquest, entailing roughly 100,000 men each, that directly targeted the enemy's capital, presumably in the belief that destroying their strength, their center of gravity, and decapitating them would compel them to surrender. While there were alternatives, siegecraft methods and devices had advanced considerably since Sunzi had advised against sieges and undertaking city assaults, and that cities had in fact become prime targets because of their wealth and importance. Moreover, both these capitals were easily accessible if well fortified. Zhao and Han in turn quickly appealed to Qi for military aid, prompting heated discussions in Qi's capital. Qi didn't have a particularly close relationship with Zhao or with Han later on, but its officials found the specter of a newly invigorated Wei, commanding the allegiance of an increasingly huge populace in a vast, fertile area, highly troubling. Responding to their request was therefore a matter of self-interest, as Zhao certainly knew. Nevertheless, some members of the court felt isolationism to be the best policy. Others that a reputation for righteousness, which was not without political and military value, necessitated a response. No doubt cognizant of Sunzi's realization that engaging in warfare in an unstable, multi-party situation could debilitate a state so sufficiently to make it easy prey for a different aggressor altogether, Sun Bi proposed a strategy that reconciled the various positions and would ensure that Qi wouldn't suffer devastating losses by interceding too early. According to the great Shiji, Sun Bean said, "No one trying to untie a tangled cord strikes it with a clenched fist, nor does anyone trying to disengage two combatants strike them with a halberd. You should hit their vacuities while they confront each other. Because their strategic power is blocked by the stalemate, the difficulty will be resolved by itself." And Sun Bean continued by saying, "Wei and Zhao are attacking each other. So Wei's light troops and elite soldiers must all be deployed outside their state. Only the weak and old can remain. Wouldn't it be better to lead the troops on a forced march, occupy their roads, and strike their newly vacuous points? They will then certainly release Zhao in order to rescue themselves. With one move, we will execrate Zhao from its encirclement and reap the benefit of Wei's exhaustion." As a result, Qi decided to wait until the two combatants severely damaged each other, then rescue Han Dan by manipulating and destabilizing Wei's armies before actually assaulting them. In this way, Qi could play a righteous role and presumably reap some political and economic benefits from Zhao, and similarly from Han later. Sun Bean thus embraced Sunzi's dual concern, with warfare being the greatest affair of state and being enormously expensive and debilitating. In striking Han Dan, Wei intended to block Zhao's expansion towards the southwest and to re-annex territory that had once been part of Jin. It would thereby forge the power base it needed to withstand Qin's growing strength, as well as offensives from Chu and Qi, and to go on and dominate the realm. Now, because the king was greedy and ambitious, he chose brutal military conquest over alliance building. And meanwhile, Zhao had felt compelled to augment its own domain just to keep pace with its potential enemies. And so it launched a major offensive against the minor state of Wei, which resulted in its conquest. This enraged the king of Wei because the minor state of Wei had been a client state and under their protection. The attack unfolded in 354 BC, when 80,000 troops reached Han Dan after an initial clash at Churchill. However, instead of the quick, hoped-for victory, a year-long siege ensued before Wei apparently emerged victorious after an unknown number of assaults and significant losses. Presumably near the end of the siege, when Sun Bean decided the moment for a destructive thrust had arrived, Qi dispatched a limited force towards an important town called Xiangling. While unstated, it probably had multiple objectives: stiffen Zhao's resolve, tie up Wei's troops, threaten Wei's territory, and maintain Qi's own reputation. However, clandestinely fostering arrogance and disdain in their enemy with a display of tactical ineptness, and thereby encouraged Pang Juan to concentrate upon the siege of Han Dan, was probably far more important. As a deliberate measure, it well accorded with Sunzi's emphasis upon war being the Tao of deception, and on displaying weakness to nurture arrogance and laxity. After committing limited forces to Xiangling, Sun Bean decided to further obfuscate the enemy with another show of martial incompetence, an attack on Pingling, located in Wei's southeastern corner. According to the military method, Sun Bean advised, "I suggest that we go south to attack Pingling. The town is small, but the district is large. The population is numerous, and its mailed soldiers abundant. Being a military town in the Dongyang region, it's difficult to attack. We will thus display something dubious to them. Moreover, when we attack Pingling, Song will be to the south, Wei to the north, and Shichou will lie along our route. Since our supply route will be cut off, we will show we don't understand military affairs." To trick Pang Juan into believing Qi's leaders were blundering incompetence, and Qi's forces need not be a cause for concern, Sun Bean sacrificed a limited force. He thus exemplified the dictum that those who excel in employing the army can bear to kill half their officers and soldiers. Once the segmented thrust at Pingling resulted in the intended highly visible defeat, Qi undertook another apparently ill-conceived thrust towards Wei's vital metropolitan center at Daliang. The military methods assert Sun Bin deliberately dispatched only light or chariot forces, visibly followed by only a portion of their strength, to show that they were few. This was designed to accomplish two objectives: to prod Pang Zhuang into mounting a rapid response in order to deal with highly mobile troops, and to convey an impression of limited numbers that might be easily countered. Pang apparently viewed this new initiative as a desperate, easily thwarted venture, exactly as Sun Bin intended. Compelled to respond to the king's urgent command to return and deflect the new threat, the overconfident Pang rashly abandoned his heavy supply train and probably his heavy forces and started to race back to Daliang. Since the mountainous terrain limited the possible routes, Sun Bin was able to anticipate Pang's movements. Now, well in accord with Sunzi's dictums and his own tactical formulations, he mobilized Qi's main force, then being held in reserve near the border, and arrived at Guiling, the site chosen for the intercept and engagement first. By the time Pang's force arrived, Qi's troops had deployed in depth and positioned themselves to fully exploit the terrain. With part of them concealed in ambush, Sun Bin's well-rested troops easily defeated Wei's harried and no doubt nearly exhausted armies. By being deceptive and unorthodox, Sun Bin thus concealed the invisible in the visible and realized Qi's objective of vanquishing Wei on his own rather than on Zhao's schedule. The Ma-ling campaign, which unfolded in 341 BC, more than a decade after Wei's embarrassment at Guiling, once again began with a provocative move by King Hui of Wei to seize a state capital, in this case, Han's capital of Zheng. The king thus chose to forcefully annex territory and absorb people from states that might otherwise have been co-opted as effective allies. As usual, there was a sort of insignificant proximal cause: Han's unwillingness to submissively attend a convocation of states instigated under King Hui's leadership in 344 BC. In preparation for the campaign in 341 BC, King Hui improved Wei's diplomatic relations with Qin and Zhao to preclude predatory actions while his main force was preoccupied outside the state. Because of its relatively isolated position mainly in the south, Han's strategic options were limited. Many states could provide military assistance, but only Qi, Qin, and Chu could immediately respond, after which Qin and Chu might exploit any weakness to occupy parts of Han themselves. As before, Han beseeched Qi to provide the forces vital to its survival, prompting a replay of the earlier debate over the advantages of acting or remaining aloof. Sun Bin is again portrayed as framing their policy. Quote, "Now, if we rescue them before the armies of Han and Wei have been exhausted, we will replace Han in receiving the brunt of Wei's forces, while conversely be obeying Han's commands. Moreover, Wei is determined to destroy their state. When Han sees it's about to perish, it will certainly face east and inform us. By relying on our close alliance with them and taking advantage of Wei's exhaustion, late, we can doubly profit and gain an honored name." Events proceeded pretty much as predicted, because Han, encouraged by the prospect of imminent aid from Qi, but rather maybe naive in having failed to learn from Qi's response to Zhao's desperation, they engaged the enemy 5 times before acknowledging the hopelessness of the situation and submitting themselves to Qi in a last-ditch effort to retain some semblance of an independent existence. Qi therefore knew the moment had arrived to dispatch the forces they had no doubt been preparing for months. Once again, they decided to strike at Daliang, perhaps already designated as Wei's capital. This prompted the terrified king of Wei to hastily order the heir apparent, Prince Shen, to take command of the troops being mobilized to brunt the threat, and unite with Pang Zhuan's forces, which would themselves have to turn back to create a combined force. The king may well have been frightened by the reputation Sun Bi's army had garnered, for they were said to eat people and cook the bones, while the officers never think of turning away. Sun Bi's strategy for the Ma-ling campaign employed the tactical principles previously witnessed. Play upon expectations, deceive and manipulate the enemy, exhaust them, disorganize them, exploit advantages of terrain, and concentrate forces before attacking. Most important of all was enhancing Pang's blatant disdain for Sun Bi, despite his earlier ignominious defeat. This was done by undertaking a highly deceptive retreat. Sun Bi reportedly said to Tianji, the force's actual commander, quote, "The soldiers of the three Jin, Han, Wei, and Zhao, are coarse, fearless, and courageous, and they regard Qi lightly. They even term Qi cowardly. Now, one who excels in warfare relies upon his strategic power and realizes advantage from leading the enemy about. As the art of war observes, one who races 100 li in pursuit of profit will suffer the destruction of his foremost general. One who races 50 li in pursuit of profit will arrive with only half his army. Upon entering Wei's borders, let's have our army light 100,000 fires for cooking. Then tomorrow, 50,000. And the day after tomorrow, only start 30,000. Now, the number of fires being lit for cooking is, of course, grossly overstated. Pang reacted just as predicted, for after the third day he reportedly exclaimed, "Now I truly know Qi's forces are terrified. They've only been within our borders for 3 days, but more than half the officers and soldiers have deserted." Reportedly, he then abandoned his slower-moving, ponderous infantry units and mounted a fervent pursuit at double speed with his chariots and elite units. Sun Bi chose Ma-ling in the southwest for the decisive clash. The terrain around Ma-ling Mountain, from which the site derives its name, was constricted. The main road passes through a moderate valley, marked by ravines and wooded hillsides that could conceal a large number of troops. Being familiar home territory, Qi's commanders had ample opportunity to choose and improve their positions. Now, according to the Shiji, Sun Bi accurately calculated Wei's forces would penetrate the valley at nightfall, and he therefore had the bark stripped from a tree and "Pang Juan will die beneath this tree" written on it, setting the scene for a highly melodramatic development. Sun Bi's forces were outnumbered by Pang's oncoming juggernaut of 100,000, even though Pang had left a major portion of his armies behind. However, Qi not only had the advantage of occupying the terrain first, it uniquely had 10,000 skilled crossbowmen that Sun Bi concealed in ambush along the heavily vegetated valley walls. Presumably some of the rest of his forces were held in reserve, others deployed at either end of the valley to close the trap, as well as in the valley itself to forcefully stop any advance. Again, according to the Shiji's famous depiction. After ordering their 10,000 skilled crossbowmen to wait in ambush on both sides, Sun Bi instructed them, "At dusk, when you see a fire, arise and shoot together." That evening, Pang Juan indeed arrived beneath the debarked tree. He saw the white trunk with the writing, struck a flint and lit a torch. He hadn't finished reading the message when 10,000 crossbowmen fired en masse, throwing Wei's army into chaos. Pang knew his wisdom was exhausted and his army was defeated. So he cut his own throat, exclaiming, "I've established a clod's fame." Qi's full force then decimated Wei's armies and captured Prince Shen. Rather than plotting an open field, direct confrontation of heavy forces certain to incur massive casualties on both sides, Sun Bi thus actively structured the situation to bring maximum firepower from protective cover upon a totally disorganized enemy hurtling onto constricted terrain where no escape, no counter-deployment would be possible. Furthermore, in the darkness of the night, Wei's troops had no idea of the terrain's configuration, no knowledge of the defensive or offensive contours. In short, they had rushed into a darkened pit with no hope for survival. Wei's defeat has justifiably been attributed to Sun Bin's brilliance in fathoming and manipulating his nemesis, Juan, who evaluated everything through the matrix of his own desires and expectations. He was lured into obliviously rushing forward without accurate intelligence, an effective battle plan, or any sense of the many lessons earlier military strategists such as Wu Tzu had taught about pace, measure, conserving strength. Moreover, Sunzi had warned against pursuing feigned retreats, approaching high mountains, and approaching hills who have hills behind them, or swallowing an army acting as bait, which of course Sun Bin's force was. The fact that an exhausted army has little chance against a prepared, rested foe is so axiomatic it hardly needs repeating. After the massacre at Ma-ling, Wei was forced to acknowledge Qi's hegemony. It never regained its former position of dominance, but instead became the target of major attacks mounted by Qin, which had just begun its ascent under Xiangyang's personal direction. Weakly and ignominiously, it eventually perished late in the next century. As always, thank you for watching.